And friends, as we reach the end of our sermon series on friendship, we come to the end of the book of Ruth, chapter 4, verses 13 to 22. I'll be reading this morning from the Living Translation. Listen now for the Spirit speaking to you. So Boaz married Ruth, and when he slept with her, the Lord gave her a son. And the women of the city said to Naomi, "Bless the Lord who has given you this little grandson. May he be famous in Israel. May he restore your youth and take care of you in your old age. For he is the son of your daughter-in-law, who loves you so much, who has been kinder to you than 7 sons." Naomi took care of the baby, and the neighbor women said, "Now at last Naomi has a son again," and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse and the grandfather of King David. This is the family tree of Boaz, beginning with his ancestor Perez. Perez, Hezron, Ram, Amminadab, Nahshon, Salmon, Boaz, Obed, Jesse, and David. Here ends the reading. Now, God, may these words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be pleasing in your sight, for you are our rock and our Redeemer. It was one of those really strong college friendships. Many of us have them, do we not? The ones that take you everywhere afterwards. James, whose friends called him Pete, was a sophomore when Hiram, whose friends called him Sam, enrolled. And they hit it off immediately. Both were introverts who openly preferred horses to people. Though Pete and Sam graduated a year apart, they were both stationed in St. Louis after graduation, and they resumed their friendship right where it had been left off. Pete took Sam to his cousin's home while he was there, and Sam met his future wife, Pete's cousin. War broke out shortly thereafter, and both Pete and Sam were sent to fight together, spending 2 years on the front. When Pete was wounded, he was sent back home briefly, where he married his wife, Louise. Now, after the war, Pete returned to Virginia, and Sam returned to St. Louis to marry Pete's cousin. They remained such friends, however, that both Pete and his wife made the long drive up to attend, and some accounts say that he served as the best man. Then life happened, as it does. Sam was stationed in Detroit before he resigned his commission, and Pete served out west. Once or twice they saw each other in St. Louis, but mostly they lost touch. They did not meet again for nearly 15 years. When Sam, now known as Union General Ulysses S. Grant, stood across from old Pete, or Confederate Lieutenant General Longstreet, in the I knew I was going to slip that one up, Appomattox courthouse, as General Lee surrendered his army. Upon seeing him, Grant embraced Longstreet, immediately inviting him to play cards, just as they had as youth. It was Pete, or Longstreet, who had in fact pushed Lee to surrender, knowing that his friend Sam, General Grant, would be fair, which he was. The friendship that had started more than 20 years before as teens went on to profoundly shape the end of the American Civil War. It might have done so even more and earlier if Lincoln hadn't rejected the peace talks years before that were to take place, being hosted by Mrs. Grant and Mrs. Longstreet together. As it was, Longstreet's friendship helped end the Civil War. He became a fierce advocate for Reconstruction in the South and was eventually given diplomatic appointments for his loyalty to the American Union cause. If you haven't heard of the friendship between Longstreet and Grant, perhaps you've heard of Max Schmeling. He was a young German boxer, largely thought to be the best in the world. It was 1930, and Schmeling had won the first ever world heavyweight boxing title, and then he retained the title and then lost it when he was heading into the 1936 championship. He was considered a sure thing. But in a lead-up, Schmeling was matched with Joe Louis. He was 24-0 at the time and considered invincible. Joe was an African-American man who was already very clearly one of America's first black athletic heroes. Schmeling was considered old in America, probably on his way out. When they stepped into the ring in 1936, tensions were already high between the two countries. It was a sold-out match in Yankee Stadium. Schmeling won soundly. Far ahead in the scores before a knockdown in the 12th, it was only one of two knockouts in Louis's entire career, and his first loss. Langston Hughes was there, and he described walking down 7th Avenue and seeing grown men weeping like children and women sitting on the curbs with their heads in their hands. The fight was, of course, cast in nationalist terms, and Hitler had taken a great interest. By the rematch in 1938, much of Nazi propaganda was based on Schmeling's fight as the great Aryan hero versus you can imagine what Nazi Germany might have to say about a black man. Louis won solidly, if perhaps some say a tad unfairly, having gone for the kidneys a couple times. Even in the American press, who had been so behind him, after victory, they resorted to some of the worst, most sickening racial stereotypes you can imagine. Even the first black national hero was not above the vitriol. But what folks didn't know is that the two, in their ordeal, had already become fast friends. Pitted against each other, a battle of nations and races, the two had instead found a fast friend and a common soul. Schmeling and Louis made a point to visit each other every year for the rest of their lives. And when Louis died in 1981, Schmeling paid all of the expenses and served as a pallbearer. And as the Nazi power started acting on the violent rhetoric, it was later learned that Schmeling had gone so far as to hide Jews in his home to escape the Gestapo. He became most famous as an anti-Nazi hero. Grant and Longstreet, Louis and Schmeling. Then there's, of course, Virginia Woolf, John Maynard Keyes, and E.M. Forster. Or the group of Charles Babbage, John Herschel, William Whewell, and Richard Jones, who liked brunch so much that they ended up inventing the scientific method. There was Socrates, Aristophanes, Plato, and Aristotle. Aristophanes, I knew I was going to do that one wrong too. Ernest Hemingway, James Joyce, F. Scott Fitzgerald, and Gertrude Stein. There was the friendship between J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, or the one between Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, and Harvey Firestone. Think of this group of friends: Andy Warhol, Salvador Dali, Allen Ginsberg, Truman Capote, Lou Reed, Bob Dylan, Mick Jagger, and Betsy Johnson. Or Gilda Radner, Dan Aykroyd, Chevy Chase, Jim Belushi, Lorne Michaels, Bill Murray, and John Candy. Heidegger and Arendt, Marx and Engels, Sartre and de Beauvoir, Whitehead and Russell, Emerson and Thoreau, Haydn and Mozart, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Einstein and Marie Curie, Jesus and the disciples, Ruth and Naomi. Friends, we are told that we should be alone, that we are individuals that make our own way. We're born alone and we die alone. But ask any woman who's given birth, and that is as far from the truth as it could possibly be. That is a group project. Yet one of the single greatest mistakes of modern Western history is the idea that we should be able to go it alone. Now, over the summer, we've already discussed the erroneous belief that focusing on ourselves alone is healthy or self-care, or that time spent with others is in a zero-sum equation with the care of self. But there's also the flip side. Few ideas have been more poisonous to success than individualism. No science, no sport, no leader, no music, no creativity, no thought occurs in a vacuum. Throughout history, few have succeeded without a core group of friends, pushing them on, offering support, and truth-telling critique all at the same time. Few things have shaped the world as much as the one thing we seem to take for granted today: friendship. Jesus, when leaving his disciples, calls them not brothers, not family, but friends. Agape love, considered the highest form of love, the all-encompassing love of God for creation, the love that is considered the central principle undergirding the universe, the love that Jesus extends to his followers, is as friends. That is how Jesus charges them to follow his commands to love. I have loved you as friends, so go forth to do the same. Friends, unlike family, don't feel they have to support you unconditionally. They can hold you accountable in ways you might actually hear. Friends, unlike lovers, do not flatter you for their own gain. They're not fickle in the same way. And unlike pragmatic love, the kind that develops between long-term partners, friends do not thrive on compromise, but actually on creativity, on creation, on doing new things together. Friendship, when given the time it deserves, is chosen by Jesus as the highest form of human relationship, and the one we are tasked with building here in this place. It does not occur on its own as we seem to expect it to. It's not a matter of likes or simply showing up, but a matter of making choices every day to show up for one another. When Naomi said she would follow Ruth, and when Ruth found ways for Naomi to approach Boaz, these were little acts and little choices. The actions of one outcast and one immigrant in solidarity. Yet through those choices they made came Jesse, then David, then Jesus, known in song to be the root of Jesse's tree. Without the choices both women made to prioritize one another, we simply would not be here today. And so our final song today is one we often sing at baptisms, right? We think of it as a promise made by God, certainly. But it is also a promise that we make to one another, to walk with one another through all the stages of our lives, not because we have to, but because we can, and because it just might change the world. Thanks be to God.